online. Many of them are not here yet. I want to wake everyone up with a little joke this morning. Which verse of the Bible gets quoted most often at a steakhouse? It's Matthew 25:21, because when someone asks you how you want your steak, you can just quote Jesus. Well done, good and faithful servant. It is such a privilege to have everyone here, both in person and online. I feel like I'm on PBS. This programming is brought to you by member support and by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you. Before we get into our first panel, just a few announcements. Throughout the day, for people in person, you can buy copies of 2 books. Stuart McDonald's new book, Tradition and Tension, on the history of the PCC from 1945 to 1985, as well as the book Ian McKechnie edited of Stories on the History of the PCC, titled Recollections and Reflections. There are so many people to thank right now for making this possible. The executive, Ian, Marilyn, Jasmine for running the tech, and I'm just so grateful to all of you. This is an important time in the history of the church, and I think it's worth thinking about how important church history is and has been to the PCC, because some of our most important people in this denomination have been church historians, and a number of them will be part of our meetings today. But Walter Bryden, one of the church's most important theologians of past century, started out as a church history professor. Another principal of Knox, Alan Forrest, was someone who believed very much in the importance of church history. And in the 4th volume of Called to Witness, one of the collections of biographies on the history of the church, John A. Johnston wrote a chapter on Alan Leonard Forrest. And as Johnston put it, for Forrest, church history represented the accumulated wisdom of the church. The church was a community of memory. And church history was for him an essential means of access to that memory. It is the capacity to connect with that memory that gives the church and its members their sense of identity. Ignorance of that history could, and often did, lead to a loss of a sense of who we are as a church and what we should be about. But church history for him was not simply a matter of accessing the past. Through church history, the church not only understood more fully its traditions, but was better equipped to discern how God was at work in the world here and now, unquote. And we will get to learn more about some of those things today at our conference. Our first panel is on the history of mission in the church. And we have 3 panelists, Tom Carter, Cathy Reid, and Louise Gamble. And we are very grateful that Louise is here with us because there was an unexpected cancellation of some GO trains today. We will start with our first presenter, Cathy Reid, who is one of our presenters joining us from another country today. Cathy was born in Scotland, and that is where she is joining us today. After graduating, she became a high school teacher. As a student, she volunteered with the Church of Scotland Summer Mission Program, and it was through this that she met her husband, the Reverend Andrew Reid. She was a member of the Women's Guild in, I'm going to probably say this wrong, Ardclack and Oudlearn. She has always been very involved with mission and joined the Women's Missionary Society 41 years ago upon coming to Canada. And she says that I've had the privilege of serving at the local Presbyterian, synodical, and national level of the Women's Missionary Society, and has served as president of the Women's Missionary Society. And it was through the WMS that she realized a lifelong dream of being able to visit Malawi for the first time in 2009. She has been to Malawi 7 times and says, I think part of me stays there each time. She represents the WMS as a member of the Women's Interchurch Council of Canada and was the WICC president for the past 2 years. She has 1 son who is married and lives in Ayrshire. She and her husband have returned to Scotland to live, but we're delighted to have them with us here today. So please, Cathy, get us started.
Thank you, Robert, for that very welcoming introduction. It is indeed a privilege to be able to share with you today some of my experiences in Malawi, and also to share my love of the people and the projects there. I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation just so that you can have some visuals as we go along. So give me a moment. As Robert mentioned, my first time in Malawi was in 2009. And this was through a Women's Missionary Society exposure tour. And we have been running those in the WMS for many years. And as he said, it was a lifelong dream to be able to go there. I don't know if everyone is aware of where Malawi is. On the left, you'll see it's the little finger in red, and on the right is a map of Malawi. It's a landlocked country in southeastern Africa. It's bordered by Zambia, Tanzania, and Mozambique. It has a population of just over 22 million people. It has a beautiful lake which covers 1/3 of the country, and unfortunately, 95% of the people who live in Malawi have never seen it. The capital of the country is Lilongwe, but it is better known, the country as the warm heart of Africa. Some of you will know that long-time missionaries in Malawi were the Reverend Glenn and Linda Ingalls. They first went to Malawi in 1980, and they were our hosts for our exposure tour. What they had been asked to do was to let us see some of the projects that were already taking place under the auspices of PCC, and also to let us visit some of the villages that they were working in. This was one of the first villages we visited. It's called Chipagala. And what I noticed right away was a pile of bricks with weeds growing out the top. Samson here was one of our guides, and I asked the question, why is there a big pile of bricks there? Why aren't they being used to build something? His answer, they can make the bricks themselves, but what they haven't got are the resources to turn those bricks into a much needed children's centre. That was on day 2 of my visit to Malawi in 2009. And I kept that thought with me throughout the 3 weeks I was there. On returning to Canada, I challenged our church, New St. James Presbyterian Church in London, Ontario, to see if we could raise the funds to help them build that children's centre. Within 6 months, we had raised enough money that we could help them build Timbani CBCC, which stands for Community-Based Children's Centre. And it was a real joy to be able to go back 2 years later and visit that centre when it was officially opened, and 100 children were then taking part in daily activities in the centre. That was the start of our partnership with this village, quite a remote little village, not that far from Blantyre, which is one of the major cities, but far enough away that it was very, very poor, and the people had sort of lost a bit of the hope that maybe one day they did have. What has happened since then is that we have been able to build that partnership. These t-shirts you'll see represent what we were given when we went on one of our visits, to really welcome us and feel part of the whole community there. But it's the children that enjoy the centre. So with parachutes, with balloons, we have lots of activities. We work with the children during our time there. We do a lot of crafts with them, and it's wonderful that they enjoy doing them, but then to see them running around the village here with their little animal headbands on was a tremendous sight for the rest of the time that we were there. One of the big things that we have worked with the Cathy Centre is that funds are sent from New St James every 3 months to provide a daily meal for those children who are aged 3 to 5. Without this, many of these children who are orphans or vulnerable children would not get a daily meal. And here they are enjoying their porridge, and that's the best way I can describe it on that one. Obviously, the centre has grown over the years, and we now have 110 children in it. And I was there this May and spent 3 weeks with them, enjoying being there and improving through funds that we were able to take so that they could work on to improve the facilities for these children. We do not go in and dictate. It's hopefully a true partnership in that we work with them. We don't do the work ourselves. We put the funds in so that they can employ local people to actually carry out the renovations that are required. Here's outside the centre. Our young people provided the funds to be able to have some playground equipment, and I'm amazed that these stand up after 14 years of use. An extension of the Children's Centre, which I said was for preschool, was to actually establish a small school so that when the children graduated from the preschool, they would be able to stay in the village. And this was built at the side of the church and is the Mount Moriah Primary School. And when they have extended this now so that we have 250 children who are there from age 5 through 12. Up to age 12, the children can go to school free of charge. After that, they have to pay for their education, and many of them never go any further. We've been able to put desks in so they don't have to sit on the floor. Having a children's centre and extra space, we have been able to help by training women on treadle sewing machines how to make clothing, and especially school clothing, because children have to have a school uniform to be able to go to school. And here's one of the ladies that was trained, and then she in turn trained others. And this is what the partnership has all been about. We're very fortunate that the chief of the village, a woman, she is an amazing person, and she has worked closely with us over the 16 years. And it's a great joy to be with her each time we go and to share what is happening. She had a bad fall a couple of years ago, so through friends we were able to provide her with a wheelchair, and they carry her over to the centre when we're there so that she can be with us. You can't do all of that without having hosts, people in the country that you can work with. This is the Reverend Dr. Silas Enchozana and his wife Margaret, who have been great friends. They have been to Canada. Silas was awarded his doctorate at Knox College a number of years ago, and they help with our itinerary and help us with any local issues and, of course, translation. We also rely on the local church in Chipagala. And here is the minister, some of the Bimano Guild, which is the equivalent of our WMS, and some of the men's fellowship, who on this occasion with this photograph came to greet us at the airport as we arrived in May. Meeting the people, getting to know the people, sharing our common love of God has been a big part of our partnership with the people in Chipagala. We did not anticipate that Cyclone Freddy would have such a big impact on Chipagala itself. And about 1/3 of all the houses were either knocked down completely or damaged considerably in that cyclone, which hit in the beginning of 2023, just before we went that year. And this is how some people then had to live. Another one. Again, through the Women's Missionary Society of PCC, we were able to send emergency grants so that basic supplies were bought for people that were affected. They literally lost everything. Some of the more recent things that are happening, the ladies now are having training on how to make yogurt. One of the problems is when you're studying, trying to raise enough money on a daily basis to feed your family, is how to actually raise that income. And when people don't have very much, what can you make that they will then buy? Someone came up with the idea, let's teach them how to make yogurt because it's a subsistence food. So they've had training sessions last month so that the ladies can learn how to make the yogurt and then to sell it. And this is proving to be a great success. The men are getting instructions on welding. Not in our village, we don't have the power to be able to do it, but in a neighbouring village, in the hope that they then can find work in neighbouring villages or in the city of Blantyre, where they can put their skills to work. Another project that we've undertaken is to provide land. Inflation has hit Malawi really badly. I don't know if anybody followed the general election that just took place, but what they said was inflation was sitting at about 30%, and their currency had been devalued so much. So by buying land, we hoped that they could grow some of their fruits and vegetables and be able to, again, use them for themselves and the extra to be sold to gain some income. There was, again, corporate destruction in the cyclone when it took away about half of the land, but they're still working with the other half. Another big project that we work on is to supply feminine hygiene kits to the girls in the high school. This year we took 250 of those of reusable hygiene products. And here you see the girls getting really excited because they now realize they can go to school every week of the month instead of losing a week's schooling per month. They were really, really excited to receive these kits, which are designed to last 2 years in between our visits. There's some others. This was when they were in school uniform. The other one was taken at a weekend because we did half and half. And when the head girl spoke, she spoke of hope because they would be able to continue their education, which is so important, and therefore be able to have a better life for themselves and their family. I mentioned the Movano Guild earlier, the equivalent of the WMS. They meet on a weekly basis. They meet for worship, for Bible study, for visiting the sick and the elderly, and they bring so much joy to people around them. One thing that we've found is very different is they have to go through a whole 9 months of training before they're allowed to be a full-time member of the Guild. And how they manage to keep their uniforms so white, I don't know, because they've no proper washing facilities as we have. Another aspect for our visits is to get to know individual people. Now, my last visit, this was one of the elders and his wife that I was able to spend a whole day with. Now, I don't speak Chichewa, which is the other language in Malawi, and they don't speak a lot of English, but I had a translator with me. And I was able to visit their home, their family, and just share together our common love of God. This is their grandchildren that they have, and they proudly came out to meet me and share with me when I was there. It was a wonderful day to feel so close to them and to realize that, you know, we all believe in the same God and want to share God's love with everyone that we meet. This is a mission that I find is very close to my heart. This is a mission to street kids. These kids have no homes. They live under trees, at the side of roads, under market stalls. And 62 of them have been taken in by the Reverend Dr. Silas N. Chosana and allowed to go to school at one of their public schools so that they can get some education. They are provided with the uniform, and then groups like ours try to help them with their education. We took very basic things like notebooks, pens, pencils, ruler, eraser, all of these sort of things. And again, they were so happy to receive these very, very basic things. It was as if they had given them $1 million. This is my last slide, which I wanted to let you see. Malawi has some very, very beautiful areas. This is up at the lake. And a viewpoint from a little cottage that I stayed in for a couple of nights there. And then again in the evening. And it seems so sad that me as a visitor can take in this beauty, and yet the majority of people in Malawi will never see it in their lifetime. We try to be very careful as we set up this partnership and continue with that partnership, that even though we only go every second year, we are in constant communication with them, remitting funds to provide food and other supplies that are essential, and just to let them know that we're praying for them on a daily basis. They are part of our worship in New St. James, and we know that we are part of their worship in their church, Mount Moriah Church of Central Africa Presbyterian. I want to stop there because I don't want to go over my time, but I'll be able to answer any questions when the time comes. Thank you for listening.
That was a lovely presentation, and those pictures, even though from Africa, bring back a lot of memories of the village of Jobat that we were in India when I was a child. Some conditions haven't improved very much. It seems a lot is the same.
Thank you so much, Louise. Just a reminder that the format is that each of our speakers will go, and then we'll have Q&A for all of them at the end of our session. Our next speaker is Tom Carter, who has a memoir that he can tell you about, I suppose, in a bit. Tom Carter is the eldest son of Arnold and Elizabeth Betty Carter. He was 12 years old when the family went to India. After their return to Canada, he finished high school in Windsor and did a BA at the University of Windsor. In 1972, he moved to Edmonton, where he completed an MA and LLB at the University of Alberta. He has had a varied career in private law practice as a trust officer, as a self-employed legal writer, and as a professor of business law at Grant MacEwan University in Edmonton. While at MacEwan, he obtained an LLM from the University of London's external program and accompanied MacEwan business students on 2 study tours to India. Tom and Georgia live in Edmonton. They have 3 children and 1 grandson, none of whom have been to India yet.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you, Dr. Revington and Secretary Mason, for the invitation. It's quite special. Disclosure, the Carter family are not and never have been Presbyterians. Well, with the exception of my mother. My mother was a Nicol, and her parents emigrated from Scotland after the Great War, settling in Windsor, and I believe they were founding members of Knox Presbyterian in Windsor, although growing up we really had no connection with that church. Our church experience was at the Westminster United around the corner from where we lived in Windsor. And so how did my dad get to be a Presbyterian missionary? Well, that's a good question, of course. My dad was a family doctor with a fairly thriving practice, but I don't, looking back at it now, I think it was a bit of midlife crisis, perhaps. And also in my book that I will expand on later, I dug into this and discovered 2 or 3 reasons why where his interest in mission work came from. But anyway, regardless, he accepted an invitation from the well-known E.H. Johnson, Secretary of the Foreign Board of Missions of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, in probably late 1962, to go to the Beale Field in central India and replace Dr. Jack Williams and family, who had to leave to return to Canada because Mrs. Williams required some sophisticated eye surgery, and they were unable to complete their 5-year term. So Dad said he would fill in for the last 2.5 years. So here's the back cover blurb from my memoir. When I was 12, an incredible thing happened. My dad dropped everything and took me, my 3 younger brothers, and our pregnant mom to India. At first, we lived on the side of a mountain in the foothills of the Himalayas. Then, 2 days after Sister Liz arrived, she was born on July 31st of 63, Dad walked my brothers and me down the mountainside to boarding school. That's Woodstock School, some of you may know of. And he, Mom, and the new baby Liz got on a train and took the 20-hour train ride to Jobat in East Central India. There, Dad became Dr. Saab at the very remote mission hospital. While he was there, he built a TB ward. Prior to departure from Windsor, the patients, a group called Patients and Friends of Dr. Carter got together and started raising money. That initiative was picked up by a columnist for the Windsor Star, a fellow named John Lindblad. His column was called the Now column, and he pushed the program. And by the time we got there, they'd raised something like $14,000, which was enough to build the TB ward and do many other things. Anyway, the colonial mission mindset, however, wore my father down. He did not finish his 2.5 years. 2 years after we got there, he brought us home. The whole thing was a very noble effort, but it was very hard on our family. Relationships frayed, and our siblings, my brothers and sister and I, split apart. So 60 years after we returned to Canada, here's the story. That sums it up. The time in India was very hard on our family. There's several reasons. First, my dad's personality. He could be ferocious. He and Ted Johnson locked horns almost from the very first day. Dad firmly believed that he knew what was right. He knew how to run a hospital, and the way Jobat was being run was simply not right. He was going to make it right come hell or high water. This was an admirable goal. He wanted to bring Jobat up, the Jobat Christian Hospital, JCH, up to the best possible standards and prepare it for the transition to local governance. Don't forget, we were there, 14, 15 years after India's independence. The Indian government, as other post-colonial governments and independent governments were doing, they were squeezing out the mission enterprise. In India, they did that by not renewing missionary visas. We, as it turned out, I didn't know this at the time. We didn't know it at the time. We were the very last Canadian doctor's family to be sent to Jobat Christian Hospital on a fairly long-term contract. So Dad thought it was time to transition to local governance, and the time was now, but he felt thwarted at every turn. He conflicted with the career missionaries. Understandably, perhaps, they had their way of doing things, but there were some tactless errors. One of them said to Dad, "You know, Doctor, you're a junior missionary and you really don't have the right to speak until you've been here for 5 years and know how things work." Well, my dad exploded. He conflicted with the board. He left me a box. He always intended to write a book. He wrote a diary in his undecipherable doctor's handwriting every single day for the 2.5 years. He collected and kept every single piece of correspondence with the board and anybody else who was involved in the project. And he never did write the book. And I determined, well, maybe I can do this now that I'm retired. And this thing has just stuck with me for such a long time. So I got busy and put it together and produced this little memoir. Going through all this material, it's clear to me that the only two people who were on board with Dad's modernization project, Indianization project, were the local Indian doctor that the Presbyterian Church had educated. He'd been educated converted and educated at Ludhiana Christian Hospital in Punjab, and then sent to London for surgical training. He was a wonderful person. And the previous doctor, Dr. Jack Williams, had hired a business manager just for the hospital. Previously, there'd been a business manager for the whole mission operation who was a Canadian missionary. But for the first time, they had an Indigenous person trying to sort out and run and manage the hospital. Those two men were stalwart supporters of my dad, but it just was, let's just say it was a rocky road. And finally, the other thing that happened too was Mom and Dad actually became estranged from their fellow missionary colleagues on the field. I knew this at the time because our school was up at a high elevation, 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and it snowed up there in the winter. So they sent us home for 3 months. So I was personally at Jobit for the winter of 63 and the winter of 64. Winter of 63, things seemed relatively harmonious to the point where you may know the name Mary Nichol. She served there as director of nursing school, I think, for many, many years. Someone had sent her a plastic model called the Invisible Man. It was an invisible plastic shell, and you glued in all the different organs, and it stood up, and somebody thought this would be a great teaching aid for the nursing school. And they sent along a tube of glue and some paints. Well, Mary didn't know what to do with this. Nobody else knew what to do with this. I show up in December of 63, and I was quite skilled at making Sopwith camels and Fokker triplanes. And so I said, I'll do that for you. She said, oh, wonderful. So every day I would go up to her living quarters and I'd sit at a little table and I'd work on this thing. But I didn't get it done before I had to go back up to school. So she said, don't worry about it. You can finish it next winter when you come down. Well, next winter when I came down, the first thing I was told was, sorry, my dad said, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to go and see those people. You can't talk to Mary. You can't talk to anybody else. We are not communicating with them anymore. That's how hot the temperature got. And anyway, 2 years to the day after Dad first set foot on the compound, he had this sense of drama and timing. He put us on the train to Bombay, and we began the journey back home. On the very last day, he wrote this in the Jobit Christian Hospital guest book, and I saw this when I went to visit in 2010. He wrote, his parting words were, to the wonderful Indian staff, thanks for everything. To the missionaries, thanks for nothing. Meanwhile, boarding school was not a walk in the park either. I was starting grade 9, but I was barely 12 and 3/4 years old. My classmates were almost 2 years older than I was. Most of them were lifelong Mish kids. They'd been born in the country. They spoke local languages. Their only experience in North America was every 5 years when they went home for a year and then came back. We were so very, very different. The school at that time, 1963, was starting to open its doors to other than missionary children, and there was a small coterie of children from diplomatic and business families based in Delhi who were there. I seemed to be like them. I had the new clothes. I had a collection of records, pop records from home. I seemed to be kind of this new, interesting character, but I wasn't living in a lovely mansion in New Delhi in the expat community. I didn't even know where I was living. I hadn't been home to Jobit yet. There we were. Plus, I had 3 younger brothers. And for some reason, maybe it was my own instinct, maybe it was the school just assumed that older children would look after the younger children. Every time something happened to one of my younger brothers, I got the call to come over, walk so-and-so to the hospital, take this, go and do that, and look after this. And so I ended up spending most of my time caretaking my 3 younger brothers. Broken arms, dysentery, paratyphoid. Even my youngest brother had to get rabies shots. and just plain old homesickness. It was not a it was a relatively unhappy time. So back in Canada, what happens? We shut it all down. Who wants to remember that? And so I tucked away everything into a little room in the back of my mind. I got a little mileage out of my high school friends in Windsor as the kid who'd been to India. But you can all imagine I talk about it for a few minutes and then eyes glaze over. They don't understand. They have nothing. They can't relate. They don't care. So you forget about it and you get on. The only thing, my dad spent exactly 1 year going around thanking the local community groups that had donated money to the TB Ward project. But that was it. Then there was our living room. Dad and Mom had purchased many lovely mementos, little furniture pieces, the lovely things that the vendors bring to your door, especially when you're up in the hills. They didn't show up in Jobit, but up in the hills, the vendors from Kashmir and elsewhere would come to the door and they'd open their blankets and spread out all these lovely things. And my parents couldn't resist. So we had all kinds of lovely things in the living room, including from Jobit, a massive leopard skin that that somebody had shot and preserved and given to Dad, and he had it mounted, and it was sitting in the stairwell. I'm looking back now and I think, how the hell do you get a leopard skin through Canadian customs? But anyway, he did. Maybe it didn't matter in those days. And the other thing that would happen is when people would show up, visitors would show up, Dad would get out his Kodak carousel projector and show his beloved slides. And every time my mother would leave the room, she just wouldn't, she did not want to relive it. So Woodstock, Jobit disappeared. But in 1987, I was out here in Edmonton. A letter arrived. It actually went to my home in Windsor. My mom forwarded it out. It was from a classmate from my class at Woodstock School. A North American alumni group had been formed about a year earlier. They were having their second annual reunion at a lovely place called Estes Park, Colorado, just west of, up in the mountains west of Denver. And something in me stirred, and I said to Georgia, I want to go. And Georgia, my wife, said, why? You hated it there. I said, I still want to go. So the two of us did. And we spent the most amazing long weekend getting to know these people from Woodstock School as the adults they had grown into. And the most amazing part of it all was I discovered that there was a vast number of those young people, young adults, who shared the same experience I did. India had not been a blessing for them. It had been well, as it turns out, it was in the long run, but they had been afraid. They had felt abandoned by their parents in this boarding school. They had felt left behind. They had felt alienated. It was just a remarkable weekend. So by the time we got home, I was hoarse. We had been talking day and night, sharing these stories. So there you are. That's my India in a nutshell. And as we used to say when we gave book reports back in grade 5, if you want to know more, you will have to read the book. And I've given information to Mr. Mason, who I think is going to share that with you. This just arrived yesterday. I've been working with a private printing press here in Edmonton called PageMaster Publication. This is self-published. It's been a slower process than I thought. I finally got the first production run yesterday, and unfortunately that didn't give me time to get a copy to the society or to the archives, but I will do that. The other piece of note is my wife and I are getting on a plane this afternoon. We're going to Greece and Turkey for 2 or 3 weeks, so I won't be dealing with this until I get back, but I will. It's now listed on their website, and here's the good news, it's there. The bad news, we have another mail strike, but you can buy the book from PageMaster and for the price plus shipping and handling, and they will ship it directly to you or mail it to you. I don't know what they're going to do, if anything, during the mail strike. One thing I really would like to mention that I didn't, in the book, my dad left 2 things of great interest to me. One was a letter he wrote in 1999 to the Board of Missions, summarizing his experience there. But at the bottom, he wrote, "This was never sent. I didn't think it would serve any useful purpose." Well, I put it in. Secondly, he wrote a list of some 30 improvements he made when he was at Jobit, many of those improvements with the money that came from the Windsor Group. See, I think the most remarkable is that somehow Dad was able to get legal title to the lands that the hospital sat on, released from wherever it was being held, registry office or whatever, where it had been held for some 30 or 40 years. The Jobit Christian Hospital title is now in the hands, or the Jobit compound title is now in the hands of this local body that runs it. And when I was there in 2010, I commented on that, and one of the people said, "Well, you know, that title is what's going to help us raise money now to proceed with further improvements and further construction." I don't know if that's happened yet, but when I mentioned that to a classmate, a fellow named Marlon Schoonmaker, whose parents were, I believe, American Presbyterian missionaries in Assam, and Marlon said, "That is huge." He says, "I know for a fact that many of the former mission endeavors in India collapsed because they did not have title to the land." As a retired lawyer, I'd love to see that chain of title. The Raja of Jobit granted the Canadian Presbyterians 100 years ago the right to build this mission. And then, of course, the Rajas disappeared through independence. So now you have independent India, and somebody's giving title to the new independent self-governing body. I'd love to see that, but of course I haven't. The other thing I'd like to say is I'm certainly not a historian. This is a very personal piece of work. It's based on my own personal. The book it's almost like there's three voices. The first part is me talking about my experiences as a kid. The second part, I just heard my dad talking to me as I went through his material. So I decided I'd write the story from his point of view. And I've called that the terrible swift pen of A.K. Carter, MD. Then I've gone to the third conclusion where I've tried to reconcile all this stuff. And that's me now as an adult, a 74-year-old person looking back. So I'm hoping that, first of all, that this has been of some interest. And secondly, that maybe this book will be of some interest to people. Again, I make no claims to be an historian. I have not. I was at the Presbyterian Archives maybe 15 years ago, and I looked through the Carter boxes, but I've never made an effort to go in and look at the Johnson material, so I don't know what the board's side of the story is, but I could draw some conclusions from the material that my dad kept. But so I'm not claiming to have to historic truthful accuracy on many of the points here, but the fact that there was conflict, and the fact that we were the last Canadian family, and the fact that there was a transition to local governance going on that seemed to be awkwardly handled, shall we say, or difficult to handle. I think, all of that is clearly true. Anyway, thank you for listening. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll be sticking around to answer questions in due course.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a very important perspective, I think, for us to hear. Our third speaker in this panel this morning is Louise Gamble. You can see her graduation photo in the hallway directly across from us. Louise Gamble fell in love with Taiwan in 1965 when she was invited by the Presbyterian Church in Taiwan to serve in an indigenous community. And I should just say that this bio I'm reading from was taken from a minute of appreciation by the Life and Mission Agency for General Assembly 5 years ago. Having attended Toronto Bible College and Ewart College, she was designated to the diaconal order. After studying Mandarin Chinese, Louise worked for 8 years alongside the Tayal people in the beautiful mountains on the northeast coast. She returned to Canada in 1973, studied social work and psychology at York University, and worked as a social worker and psychotherapist. After retirement in 2001, Louise returned to Taiwan and taught religious education in English at the Presbyterian Bible School in Hsinchu, and later at Tam Kang High School in Tam Sui. Since 2007, Louise and her colleague, Mr. Chen Kuan Chu, James Chen, have transcribed and translated the reports and correspondence of the Canadian Presbyterian North Formosan Taiwan Mission. This includes over 7,000 documents from 1868 to 1923, many of them handwritten, and there are 3 series of 5 volumes each. The first covers the life of the first Canadian missionary, the Reverend Dr. George Leslie Mackay. Louise, Reid, so great to have you, and come to the front.
Well, good morning. Okay, let's just start. Just in the past week, I talked to Mary Helen Garvin, who was in Malawi, and Desmond Howard, who was in India. So now we got a circle into Taiwan. So I arrived in Taiwan in 1963. So that makes me almost a fossil, right? I arrived there in 1965 because Taiwan had just passed 100 years of Christian witness. So I'm part of the 2nd century, and that's very important for me personally because it determines how I relate to the people of Taiwan. I've been called a staff person from the General Assembly, staff person. Not always seems like I'm part of the janitorial service, but maybe that's true. But I prefer the term mission partner. Taiwan Church calls me a mission partner, along with all the other international people that serve within the church there. And it means a lot to be called a partner rather than just a staff person or a foreign teacher. It informs our theory of mission, which isn't what we're talking about. I'm going to talk about my experience recently. I was in Taiwan for 4 months, and I've been back for about a month. And when I was there, I was immediately engaged with the people nearby. So first one was Wang Rongchang, who was the chaplain of the university next door. And his father. So when I say anything, it's just now and what happened long before. Before, his father was the principal of the Hsinchu Bible School, where I served for many years. So I've known them. I've known him since he was a little boy. My first appointment in Taiwan was to the Hsinchu Bible School, where I was to teach New Testament. I could barely speak Chinese. Although I graduated from the language school, I could barely speak. I'm really a shy person. And so I had to prepare my lecture in English, go to a teacher who helped me translate it into Chinese, memorize what the Chinese is, and then deliver this little lecture to the students, and then begin the process for the next stage. So I found that quite odorous, but by the end of the first year there, they fired me for being insufficient language skills. But that's okay. That's when I became involved with Diane Petrie. Do any of you know her? She was a public health nurse in Taiwan, and we worked together out of the northeast part of Taiwan. I'm making an assumption that you know something about Taiwan, so this might be false, but anyway. Northeast coast of Taiwan includes the Suao Highway, which is carved out of a mountain into the Pacific Ocean and is constantly falls back into the ocean. And in the Datongxiang area, where the road is carved out of mudslides, and so it rains and the road falls out. So Diane was involved in public health, myself, youth work and Sunday school teacher work. But I'll tell you, the thing that was most fun was because it rained so often, we were just isolated in Lodong, in this town. And one of the pastors had given me this woman who came to be my servant. And she and I learned how to use this old broken down washing machine. And we became friends from that point. And she and her son stayed with Diane and myself, and her husband from a tuberculosis sanatorium nearby would come and stay with us. At the same time, Dr. Chen Wufu of that town said to us, we have a graduate of the massage school who's blind, but he's so young. He's not yet 20, and he was about 18. And he can't get a job as a masseuse because he's too young. Nobody wanted a kid doing this job. So he came to live with us. So we became this group. We became family to each other. And there was Lao Yu, who was Taiwanese and didn't speak Mandarin and blind, insisted in riding our bicycle everywhere, which is quite an adventure watching. And Sabalo from the tuberculosis hospital, and Ibai and the little kid who became family to me. So this is one of the important family stories that I have of Taiwan. So I get together every time I'm in Taiwan. I spend several experiences with Ibai, this woman who came as a late teenager to be a house servant, who then became like a sister. So that you get the theme that I'm talking about family and how we're related to each other. So the second day I was back in Taiwan 3, 4, 5 months ago, I had a visit from Terry McGill. His father was missionary in Taiwan with his wife Grace, translating the Tayel language, or the Tayel language for Bible translation. And he came to introduce me to his new wife. So he was like a nephew. He calls me Aunt Louise. A few days later, I had a visit from David Geddes. Sorry, I said Garvin. David Geddes. His father and wife were also missionaries in Taiwan. So these two guys, well, they're now about 60, were little children when I first arrived in Taiwan. And it says something about the mission family that we had in Taiwan, how much we became family to each other. There's a long distance between Taiwan and Canada. It used to be that you would get on a boat to go there. And now even the air flight of 14 hours is a bit much. So we became family to each other. So the fact that I spend time with David and then spend time with Terry was so significant to me. I can't talk about the Northeast Coast without mentioning the Lin family. One of the first converts, I'm very nervous. One of the first converts to Christian thinking was one of the chiefs of the Northeast Tayal communities. Unfortunately, when I arrived in Taiwan, he had passed away from cancer, but his wife was what they called the Bible woman, Canadian missions. Maybe it was a WMS, but I can't remember, supplied a minimal salary, and she became what was called the Bible woman, a Christian helper for the villages in that area. Her oldest son became brother to me. We often talk via the computer, and he says, Sister Louise and Brother John, and we have a great conversation. He went from being the oldest son of an impoverished Tayal pastor to become a retired pastor in his own right. His brother was a professor, and mother, having raised these children on almost nothing, has succeeded in creating a wonderful family. So one of the important things about my experience in the Tayal communities and with Diane Petrie happened towards the end of my time there. In time, you need to know the context. This was during Chiang Kai-shek's control of Taiwan, and everything was militarily controlled. And lots of suppression of local people, and lots of Presbyterian pastors ended up in what's called Green Island, place for political prisoners. At that time, missionaries like Michael Thornberry, Wendell Carson, he was from the Reformed Church, Dan Beatty, the English Presbyterian, and the Vanessas from the Reformed Church of America. All of these people were expelled in a very dramatic fashion from Taiwan. But Diane and I were over in Lodong, and we hardly knew this was happening. We were returning from a trip out the Datong mountain area when suddenly the car stopped, and there was steam coming out of the engine. So Diane jumped out and lifted the engine, and the radiator exploded in her face. And her face, she put her hands to protect her face, and her face disappeared like that. But let me tell you, at that time, the military control of Taiwan came to the rescue, because the little military guard on every little bridge rushed in to rescue us. And he commandeered the first car that came along, which took Diane and myself to a local hospital. And through, without telling you all the details, Diane is without a scar today on her face because of Sam Nordoff, the missionary doctor in Taipei, who had invented a special ointment, and she applied it to her face. Through a long period of time, she was fine. So sometimes what seemed the worst possible thing, like the KMT, the Kuomintang control of every aspect of life in Taiwan, then came to our rescue. Okay, how are we doing for time? I'm just rambling on, right? I'm okay. I also, when I was there in Taiwan, went down to the town of Hsinchu, where I visited the Bible school and had a time with my old students. Another former teacher, colleague, invited all the students to get together, and we had a great time finding out what happened to them after they left the Bible school and how their faith informed what they did next in their life. One became a pastor, several became mothers and helpers in the home, and some became business people, and some didn't. One ended up in a mental facility, another became a cook, but she was very gay. So we dealt with this whole spectrum of students during that particular time. And they were there and we celebrated together. And I can't tell you what a wonderful experience that was. During these 4 months in Taiwan, Chang Guangzhou, my colleague, and I finished the last 2 or 3 documents, all those maybe 10, of the mission reports. And it included the transition from Presbyterian Church of Canada here and the United Church of Canada here, and how it impacted the Taiwan mission. Well, let me tell you, nobody hardly mentioned it in the mission reports. So the thing that was the hottest item here in Canada hardly scraped the surface in the mission reports. And it divided the mission community completely. And some folks never spoke to each other again, just like it happened here in Canada. And most of the staff moved to the English Presbyterian mission, and 1 or 2 stayed with the Canadian Presbyterian mission. It's the biggest catastrophe for the Taiwan mission, which barely surfaced in the reports at all. So now I want to mention finally my big report, which is the transcription and the translation and transcription of all of the mission documents between 1872 and 1923. The principal of the Tongkang High School, Yao Tongrong, principal, invited me to do this piece of work, which I thought, oh, this will be a snap. Well, it was a snap of about 13 years. But it was a good project. When you're retired and you're supposed to be retired and you still have interest and enthusiasm, you might as well do something like this. And so out of that came the publication of all of the mission documents. It may not mean a lot here in Canada, but it means a whole lot in Taiwan, because the names of the local people are often listed in those reports. And those families will search through those documents and find references to their grandfather or their great-grandfather to find out their own Christian lineage within the Taiwan context. So at the same time as I was doing that, since lots of people didn't know that in modern times, a missionary is assigned to do a job. Unlike the old days when a missionary is open to do anything. So at the same time as I was doing the transcription of these historical documents, I also helped with the proofreading, shall we say, of the Mackay diaries. And then there's the I did the footnotes for the good I see. Now, what is in Taiwan, they have a certain kind of street opera. And it just means that local people can get together and they create a story, and they have a stage outside the local temple and they enact a story. So the creation of the Mackay story happened in this way. So we did the English subtitles. Oh, what do you call it when it's an oversight? Oh, the subtitles were at the top. There's a name for that.
Surtitles?
Closed captions?
I don't know. I can't remember. I've heard it, but I don't remember. But anyway, they had the running English at the top of the Good IC when it was on. It was quite popular. And then also, just for a little bit of show and tell, here's the story of Mackay in English. So we translated this book too. So it's a comic form. What do you call it? A graphic novel. But it's not very novelish. It's pretty close to history. And final thing is I need to say something about Taiwan itself these days. Did you notice that Taiwan is often in the news these days? And when I realized first about the latest incursion into oh, I've forgotten this. Russia's incursion into the Ukraine. The story of that happening is happening because also the threat of it is happening in Taiwan, and it's happening that China will come as easily and take over Taiwan as Russia can easily take over, not so easy, take over either Ukraine, or Israel can take over the Golan Heights and etc. So I want to recommend a book, Why Taiwan Matters, by a British writer. His name is Carrie Brown. And just from the earliest times in Taiwan now to the most modern issue. Here it is, written in 2024. So I would encourage you to find this book, stay in tune with what is happening in Taiwan, because whether we know it or not, we Canadians have a little thread within our veins because we were there when the Christian mission first started. Okay, thanks for cluing me.
Thank you so much, Louise. So we have about 17 minutes for questions for all three of our presenters. I guess I'll start with the people here in person. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask? I guess people are thinking we can also open up to anyone online who has a question. Oh,
I would just ask if we could think about what kind of unifying sense of mission or mythology that we now contain in this year that blends these stories together. Because to me, that's really important.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we heard about 3 very different missionary contexts today.
So if I may, my name is Ross Lamb. I want to thank you all for your presentations this morning. These were most informative and appreciated. A general question, because it seems to be something that's in the air for a lot of us regarding missions these days within the Presbyterian Church in Canada and other denominations as well. Thinking back on your time in missions, how would you say in a general way your approach to missiology changed from when you began to what it would be at this time or at the time you may have retired?
Could the people online hear that?
Yes.
Who would like to go first?
Well, when I was a child, I had no theory of missionology at all. My experience, however, was that it seemed that these adults didn't know how to get along, and they didn't know how to ease themselves out of the colonial heritage as India moved into the modern 20th century. My dad was appalled that the highly trained and skilled local Indian staff were living in long rows that to my eye looked like horse stables. And that one of the things he accomplished was he immediately was able to get them a 20% salary raise. The whole thing to me as a kid seemed very strange.
Thank you, Tom. Louise?
The context here in Canada should inform our idea of mission because of the church school problems or dilemma or catastrophe or wherever you come from. Because in Taiwan, I was teaching in a private school, but it was formed because those children couldn't go to a regular school. So in a sense, it was the opposite, or maybe it was the same as here, but it was the children that were excluded from education that made the history of the Tangkang High School. But the situation, how we as foreigners relate to the local people inform me that how I am to be there, how to be present in a situation that is no longer colonial at all.
Thank you, Louise. Cathy, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I think mission has changed. I think our approach to mission has changed. And yet, I find the people in Malawi are still very much the same as they were, many years ago. I think one of the positive things that has changed is that they're using more of the local people, putting the local people into positions of authority, especially in ministry. The training of ministry has improved. We're seeing that at Zomba Theological College, where Dr. Blair Bertrand spends a lot of time online training the students there for ministry. But I think Malawi is a bit unique in that respect, in that the they still want to build relationships with their partners. And that's certainly what we have found.
Thank you, Cathy. Are there any questions from the chat, Jasmine? No. Do we have any other questions for any of our three speakers right now?
Mute. Could I ask a question?
Yep. Please go ahead.
I'm not really clear whether I'm on or not, but
Yes, you are.
okay. A question for Cathy then. Is there still a relationship between New St. James and the people in Malawi? And is this financial support exclusively from New St. James, or have you been able to get support from other churches in the Presbytery or even the Synod?
New St. James is still very involved. They do send the funds every 3 months. So the funds come mainly from our own congregation or from friends of the congregation. In the past 16 years, we have outreach to the Presbytery and Synod, but we haven't had positive help from there.
Okay. And could I ask a question of Tom?
Sure.
And that is, was sad to hear about this rift between your parents and so many of the missionaries. Was there ever any reconciliation or healing from that?
On my parents' level, I don't think so. This letter that my dad never sent, as I call it, mentions that he was surprised to find that the retired missionaries in Canada had regular gatherings, but he was never invited. He didn't know that was happening.
Oh, really? And did you ever have any contact with people like you mentioned Mary Nicol, and I had met her once.
Right.
And I've heard that people clashed with E.H. Johnson, but she didn't seem like the kind of person you'd clash with too much, but what do I know? I just wonder, did you ever have any contact with her afterward, or?
None, no.
No.
Our family, no, we had no contact whatsoever.
No.
In fact, that year my dad spent lecturing, his thank you tour, his notes indicate that he never set foot in a Presbyterian church. Now, I don't know if that's because he was not invited or if because he refused the invitation because of his bitterness, but so I don't know.
That's so unfortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, and great questions.
The issue of what happened to the children of missionaries is a really important topic. One of the impactful missionaries in Taiwan, his son became an alcoholic and never recovered life after that. And other family children were lost, as Tom mentioned, from the bigger picture. They're left to flounder without parents and without cultural identity. It's a very tragic story for many people.
Linda's quite right. When I was a child, I thought everybody at Woodstock School was just so happy. And they were all so wonderful, these kids. But as an adult and as I've developed mature relationships with classmates, it's become very obvious that there are some who simply will not reach out to us, who are just so were so negatively impacted by their overseas experiences in childhood, and there's some real tragedies. But I guess that's understood when you're plunked into or that can be understood when you're as a child with no control, no agency. You're taken out of your natural habitat where you have friends and family and relatives, and you're plunked into a situation like Jobit or Africa or Taiwan, and you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, and then they ship you off to boarding school. Could this be a recipe for discomfort? I think so.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Do we have?
Richie may have a question.
Richie, do you have a question?
Me? Yeah, I'm just wondering if Tom can elaborate on the rift between his parents or his dad and E.H. Johnson. I'm just curious about that.
Well, what I've seen in the letters, the correspondence that was flowed back and forth, Dad was very, very determined, as I said, to modernize and bring Jobit Christian Hospital up to standards. For example, they weren't doing linen counts. They weren't their monitoring of drugs was very sloppy. Materials were disappearing and being sold on the black market. They had received, in the past, they had been receiving U.S. aid supplies, but that was cut off because of mysterious disappearance of milk powder and other things that were not accounted for. The other the other problem on the administrative side, and this is with all due respect to the Women's Missionary Society, Dad couldn't understand how the director of nursing was not responsible to the medical director. She was responsible to the board of the Women's Missionary Society, and she didn't have to do what he said, to put it very bluntly. And he just couldn't follow that. So the conflict just built and built and built as he hammered away at what he saw as necessary reforms in order to get this hospital ready for the inevitable day when the PCC pulled out. And the reality is that 5 years after we left, 1970, it was turned over to the Church of North India and under their medical services division. I don't remember what it was called. I don't know if that means all money stopped flowing from Canada. I don't think so, but they survived. And at least he took pride in the fact that because he had got title issued in the name of the local authority, the government couldn't take that away, and they were able to continue. And Jobit, as far as I know, at least when I was there in 2010, remained a center for general surgery, obstetrics, and general medicine in that very remote corner of eastern Madhya Pradesh, and they were 4 or 5 hours drive away from major medical centers in Indore on the one hand and Baroda and Gujarat on the other hand. So they were really they really did survive and live up to their capacity, as far as I know. It's very difficult. I have email contact with 2 people. So the doctor Dad worked with was Dr. Daniel. When his contract with the church expired, he moved to the big city of Indore and opened a private practice. But several of his children trained as doctors. One of them is now back in Jobit, has a private clinic, but works at the hospital part-time. And then there's another person I have email contact with who's the son of one of the lab technicians that I became very good friends with his father. He used to welcome me into the lab, and when blood samples came in for analysis, he'd put them in the centrifuge and he'd let me turn the crank. And so anyway, that man's son is now an email contact, and they give me snippets of how Jobit is doing. But other than that, all I can say is I know it's alive, it's independent, it's functioning, and I think it's still serving a very good purpose.
I think we have time for one last question.
You mentioned that your father may have gone to India for reasons to do with his, his mental, maybe perhaps spiritual situation. besides not having anything to do with the Presbyterian Church when he came back, how did the experience in India affect him professionally here and perhaps spiritually as well?
That's a tough one. As I say, he was very bitter when he came back and remains so. For example, he built this standalone TB ward, which when you go back into the records, people had been talking about building that for like 20 or 30 or 40 years. He got it built with his Windsor money. But he told me one day, many years later, well, you know, they aren't even using it as a TB ward anymore. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, oh, they've turned it into some sort of a storage unit. I said, that can't be true, Dad. So when I went, I discovered that no, it was not a TB ward anymore. It was now a community health education center. The reason it wasn't a TB ward anymore is because about 5 years after we left, the Indian government had set up a massive nationwide tuberculosis eradication campaign, and they had pumped money into the local hospital run by the government, not into the Christian hospital. So the need wasn't there anymore. So that's the sort of thing that hung with him forever. Spiritually, I can't speak to that. I know he continued to attend United Churches in Windsor. Religion and faith was never something we discussed at the family table. So I think of it as it was an unexpected, an unintended experiment in the secularization of a mission hospital. And I think that was another reason why maybe that didn't sit terribly well with Johnson either. I don't know. I really don't know.
Thanks, Tom. And so we're about to go to a 15-minute break. And when we come back, we'll have Lord Robertson here at the front. But could we please just give another round of applause to our three great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I can't stick around. We're catching a plane in a few hours, so but it's not out of rudeness. We have to move on. But this has been a great honor for me. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, I am too. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you.
Okay.